Hey everyone, I want to welcome you back. I'm Michelle McGinnis, and today I have a special guest with me. Larissa is the owner and operator of her own company called Worried to Wealth, and that's how you can find her. And I'll have the description below of how you can link up with Larissa. But she is an amazing woman who kind of took what she was struggling with in her life, and which was her finances, and she discovered a lot of things about herself in regards to how to work herself through situations because of the discovery of ADD. And I think a lot of us, and why I'm bringing her on here is because in human design, I don't diagnose, can't diagnose, would never do that. But there are places in which we can see where people might be stumbling when it comes to ADD, like what their struggles are. So I wanted to bring Larissa on for her to kind of share her journey with us, to share what she offers and how she helps people, and maybe get a tip or two from her, and move along with that. So Larissa, thanks for being on with me, and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. So I own my company Worried to Wealthy, and I started my company because a couple of years ago, about 5 years ago now, my husband and I racked up $60,000 in credit card debt. We both have ADHD, and we just were not being reasonable with our money, and it had nothing to do with our financial education. We knew
Mm.
what we were doing, we knew that it was a bad decision, but we couldn't get ourselves out of this habit of just wanting what we wanted and really giving into that impulse every single time. So we were consistently buying things we didn't need. We'd go on vacations on a credit card. And when I finally figured out that this was a behavioral issue, not because of a budget, which I had tried budgeting so many times during this process, and it did nothing for me. So when I finally realized this is really a behavioral issue, this is really something where I need to lean into more of my impulse control. I need to understand what kind of emotions are really bringing this all to the surface.
Mm.
Once I started to heal that, we were able to completely shift our lifestyle. We paid down all of that debt within a year by just making drastic changes. And then after that, we were able to move out to Idaho and actually buy our first home, which was the goal behind paying down all of that debt. And so now I want to help people who really are stuck in that place where they just don't understand exactly why they can't stop spending money, because they've tried to look into it and they don't fully understand the behavior or the emotion behind why they keep spending, helping them identify that and then redirect the behavior so that they don't continue to dig themselves this hole that they don't really want to do.
Okay. And it makes a lot of sense. And so what I want to ask you really quickly, so when you guys when you learned that this was a behavior you were utilizing in order to like calm or soothe something, how do
Mhm.
you attribute that to the ADHD?
So I was very, both of us really, we were very in this place. How do I put this properly? It was a mental health thing, but we were
Okay.
both in this place where things weren't moving fast enough for us.
There we go.
So we were
Okay.
making things happen for us. And the best way that we could do that was to just put shit on a credit card.
Okay. So it's the understanding that with the ADHD that you both have was the idea that people, a lot of people talk about that there is this almost this craving or this need to have things happen quite quickly, right, to like feed the mind. Is that
Yes.
what you're relating that to? Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, we were definitely always consistently looking for that little hit of dopamine that would get
Mhm.
us to the next day or get us to the next thing. And when you look at the things that we spent money on, it was very much the hit of dopamine, but also us both kind of trying to heal our inner child without doing it in a proper way. Like we were going to Disneyland, we were buying Nintendo Switches, they were expensive and more childlike things for us to have.
Okay. Okay. Got it. And so do you feel like when you decided to make a goal, how do goals work for you generally in general? Like I think sometimes like within our spending habits, and tell me what your philosophy is on that. But sometimes when we are just earning money and we don't have any direction for it to go into, sometimes it can seem like it's just willy nilly and let me spend the way I want to spend. But when you have a bigger goal or something in common together to do, did you guys find that was an easier thread once you guys came together with a common goal? Did you see that within it or no?
Yes, absolutely. It was the common goal of we were both ready to move out of California. We were both ready to buy a house, but we knew what we had done to ourselves really
Yeah.
held us back from doing that, as it was
Right.
a lot of debt. And
Right.
so, but generally, as far as like the money goals, I'm not the kind of person, and I know a lot of ADHD people are not the kind of people who do
Mhm.
super well with a specific goal. They're
Okay.
really not the kind of thing that I can stick to. And I found with a lot of my clients, they're not the kind of thing they can stick to. So instead of creating a goal, we're creating a system. And this system is so that you still have money to spend, but you actually know how much money you have to spend. And it's separate from the rest of your money so that you're not impulsively spending all your money. You're impulsively spending what you have decided you wanted to spend.
Okay, very good. So for instance, if a client's coming to, do most of your clients who come to you have ADHD, or is
Yes.
it they do? Okay, so they can self-identify with what your stories are and how you've been sharing
Mhm.
like that dopamine rush of like wanting to get that energy up and out. And so placing it on items sometimes makes you feel secure. And of course, it can work with anything, right? It doesn't have to be money. It could be, work, it can be sex, it can be food, it can be whatever the drug of choice is. It not drug of choice, but you know what I mean? The way to
Mhm.
soothe
Yes.
that nervous system so that you can feel much calmer about what's happening in your environment. So it's
Mhm.
interesting to me because there's a huge population out there that has what we call the open uh, crown. I want to show this real quick to the viewer so they understand what I'm talking about. So in human design, what's interesting is when we have, this is called the crown area. This is a pressure center, and this is called the root, and this is also another pressure center. And both of these pressure centers are pressure from the outside world in a sense of this desire to, especially this particular one is ideas and suggestions, and that dopamine, that rush, that like, oh, I want to think, I want to do, and I want to be, can sometimes happen within this suggestible area. And if it's white on someone, it means that the outside world can certainly influence somebody much easier than if this area was defined. Does that make sense? The
Yes.
other thing that I think is interesting is this gate 2 right here, for all of my beautiful human design nerds like myself. 2 is an interesting one because when people don't have the 2 colored in their chart, a lot of times they don't necessarily know what to do with, and we're just talking about finances, so that's all I'm going to talk about it as, is that they don't have a focal point of like where to put the money. And so I see in my own coaching is that those type of people, if they have, let's say, gate 14, which is all about, it's kind of the gate of good fortune. It's people who can really amp up themselves, but more importantly, can amp up other people, and a lot of money can come through for them. But if they don't have gate 2, they don't know where to place it. And I have just seen over the years in my own practice that those that don't have gate 2 can feel that way, can kind of feel like, I don't know where to put this, so I'm going to just kind of spend it randomly. And although I don't think it's attributed to the ADD, because that's not really where it shows up in the chart, I think that's a really cool component for people who are listening to take a look at. Like if you do have 2, let's say you have your crown colored in and your root colored in, it means you still possibly could have ADD because we don't diagnose with it. But more than that, if you don't have 2, it could be that you're not sure what to do with your money, and you do get a rush from spending money, right? That's a dopamine all of us have, whether you're ADD or not. We have that rush of like spending money, and sometimes it feels good and sometimes it doesn't. But also, if you have this pressure center, because you got to understand it's a pressure from the outside world, and sometimes within that, we don't feel grounded. And if this is white, you definitely don't feel grounded consistently. You can feel grounded, but you don't feel it consistently. So I love what you're saying in the fact that when people feel that urge, that pressure, and a pressure can be an urge and an urge can be a pressure, right? To have that sensation, to have something to control, to feel in control of something. Do you see that correlation with spending and control, or do you see spending as out of control? Does that make sense what
No.
I'm saying? Both.
Yes. So
Tell me about that.
absolutely.
Okay.
People often will start spending in a way to control something. So I've had a couple of clients who the reason that they were spending was actually because they grew up in a more chaotic environment in their home
Um,
environment.
yeah.
And when they got a good paying job, they had a stable place to live, things felt too safe and too secure. And their nervous
Yeah.
system really wasn't used to that. So what they ended up doing was they would rack up their credit cards and they would just buy whatever they wanted, which was really a two part of healing the inner child. I find with a lot of my clients, it really goes back to either that inner child or that inner teenager, depending on which one is the bigger problem, right?
Right.
But it always goes back to either they're providing something that their inner child could not have, or they're repeating a pattern that their inner child is comfortable with.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that, when you're talking about the inner child work, which is huge, and I don't think there's a person on the planet that can't utilize it. A lot of people cringe when I talk about inner child work, but there is this essence that we learn most of our patterns of behavior by the age of 7.
Mhm.
um, and how to get along within your family group, whatever your family group consists of, by the age of 7 of how to behave and what not to behave. And you're such an absorber at that period of time. I love how you're talking about working, having people go back to that time so that they can take a look at like where maybe their money stories were created. And sometimes it is chaos, or sometimes it is from lack. They didn't have much, or whatever the millions of stories are, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. What's the biggest thing that you find with your clients? In particular, I think women have a tendency that they can tap into that. How do you find a difference between working with men versus women? And I'm assuming you do a lot of couple stuff. So when you're talking about inner child work, how is that really being received now, especially in the world of finances?
Yes. So
Not usually together.
right. Because I market myself and I'm out there as more of a psychological side of finance, and I'm working
Yeah.
more on that mindset.
Yeah.
Women will come to me very open and very ready to talk about these kinds of things and very prepared to be going back into the psychological. They may not know because all of your money stories really are built by the time you're 7. So
Mhm.
we're going back to how your parents managed money, what they
Mhm.
would say in front of you, what they would say directly to you, how they would interact with money, and what you observed.
Yeah.
Women are very receptive to that, and women have been very open and ready to talk about it. I've only worked with men in the context of a couple just because they're not usually as willing to go into this kind of work themselves, right? So usually it's the wife found me and brought him in, and they're a little bit more resistant to talk about it. They don't
Mhm.
necessarily want to go into the mindset. And I hear that later after our session, they will have that conversation with their wives, which is wonderful, what I would love to see. But
Right.
they're less open with me than the women are generally, so that I can't give as much feedback to what they're saying. But generally, I hear that they do process it later with their wives, which, as long as it's getting processed, that's the goal.
So do you do like a lot of behavior modification techniques with people then? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying that you're doing?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So it's a matter of taking what they have learned and having them review the stimuli and change the outcome versus telling them what they're doing wrong, which is, I think, it's a lot of the times that why people don't even want to talk about money, because they already have a lot of shame and guilt over, okay, I put my family into this type of debt, or I put my situation's crap and I know it's my own fault. But to admit to that and to work with someone can feel very, I don't know, condemning to yourself. So how is it, that you can help give a tool for somebody who may be sitting here listening? It's like, yeah, like that's me. And I don't really want to admit to it because there's a lot behind why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's really scary to do that. So what tools would you have for somebody who might be listening to this that could use some assistance, but are afraid?
Yeah, the first step is always going to be to release that guilt and shame around it, which is easier said than done. I totally understand that. But understanding that we are not taught money in school, your parents likely did not have a good financial education. Even if they had a financial education, they probably didn't understand the mindset side of it or the psychology behind it. So you inherited habits from people who didn't know what they were doing in the nicest way possible, right? They didn't know, and they didn't know that they would pass those patterns on to you. So understanding that it's not your fault. You should not feel guilt or shame, because how are you going to shame yourself for something that you didn't know?
Mm-hmm.
and releasing that so that you can really move past it. And then once we release that guilt and shame, you can start to objectively look at the trigger, because that's really what we need, is that objective look at, okay, what emotion am I feeling? What am I trying to receive out of this money I'm consistently spending? And then we can find another better way to receive that same sensory input.
So do you have any other little tips or tricks that you can do to help people who maybe aren't 100% ready to like unveil all this, but maybe you could give them a tip that they could start to incorporate themselves to feel a little bit more in control of their
Yeah.
financial situation?
So one of the biggest things is to really be cognizant of your thoughts, what the way that you are thinking about money, the way that you are interacting with money, and then think back to your childhood. How did your parents talk about money? How did they interact with money in front of you? And see if you can make any connection there. Often that's where the connection is, or if you spent a lot of time with grandparents, sometimes that comes from there. But being just more conscious of what you are saying to yourself and how you're talking about money and why you are using money in the way that you are. But I also really like finding something that works for you. So if you need to manage your money and you hate spreadsheets, don't do a spreadsheet. That doesn't
Right.
make sense. Like, think
Mhm.
about what you will do, what you will upkeep. We go for progress over perfection, because perfection is just not reasonable with money. It fluctuates. What you need to spend money on changes. Everyone's situation is different. So as long as you are making progress, you should be really proud of yourself for that. And do not guilt yourself over those little mistakes, because they're going to happen. And you should be more prepared that something bad will happen and be able to move yourself past it instead of regressing back to where you just were.
And I love that, Larissa, because you give people an opportunity to, um, I think you give people an opportunity to pause and say, "Ooh, but I did this and that was great." Because that is like you and I both have studied. I think you study psychology like I did,
Mhm.
and I think that there's such a huge component to the thousands of thoughts that you have in the day, and most of them are not in a positive framework. That's changing, right? As we're evolving in consciousness on the planet, we're seeing that people are really becoming more aware of like what they're saying to themselves. So I love that little tip of like, we're not looking for perfection, we're just looking for progress. That's huge. And that gives people the freedom to pause and say something positive, like, oh, I didn't go buy my Starbucks coffee for, all week. And so now when I am going to go buy it, I'm going to celebrate that and not beat myself up about it, because I'm human. And there are going to be days I'm going to have an emotional swell and I'm going to use these old tactics, but if it's not out of control, because I'm consciously aware of it. Is that kind of what you mean about like the progress versus perfection type of thing?
Yeah, I find a lot of my clients, so I work in a 90-day like package is what we do, just
Got
because
it.
it takes a minimum of 90 days to change a habit. And everyone should be well aware that it's going to take time, and you should expect to not reach your goals right away. If you're used to buying a coffee every single day, which coffee isn't that big of an expense, generally I want to look at things like, how much did you spend at Target last week?
Mm-hmm.
How many things did you buy that you didn't need? Did
Mm-hmm.
you go to the mall because you were bored? Did you shop online because you were bored? How much are you buying from your phone is always a big one. If you are scrolling on your phone and buying things from your phone, you're probably bored, and you should not be doing that.
Right. Yeah. And that's true. And now that nowadays it's so convenient. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, back in the day, we had to go to the store for it. So it wouldn't have
Right.
been as big as an adventure with all of that. Right. Yeah, I can see how that boredom factor has got to be huge with the ADHD. If you're bored, you're trying to fill that stimuli with something to keep your brain, yeah, from spinning out sometimes. It's interesting because when we know, like when we're talking about human design and those two centers I was saying that are either colored in or they're not colored in, and it's like sometimes with somebody who has the open head one, is that the stimulus outside of the world, they can be watching something and immediately think it's so easily, they're so easily influenced on the idea that they think that they need that because it's going to solve something. And somebody who has that area closed, although they could play with that a little bit, it isn't going to continually spin and loop in their head. Where with somebody with that open area, it can spin like, oh, you could feel better with that. It's funny because I just got done listening to a podcast about some businesses. I'm probably going to get some smarky remarks on this, but some MLMs that are out there that are they really can condition people into spending a lot of money within the company in order to be successful in that. And in some ways it frustrates me because I know if somebody has an open head center, that pressure, that idea, that inspiration that company has, or the inspiration, I'm going to solve your problems and give you that extra income that you need, right? Can cause that person to kind of spin out in that for longer periods of time and maybe push the bow like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And it's not just MLMs, it's advertising in general, maybe is what I should say. And so you're right, that boredom can cause somebody to go on and just hit it because it's just like every workout equipment anybody's ever bought. You do it because in that moment at 2 a.m. when maybe you're feeding your kid and you don't feel good about yourself and you turn on the TV and you see this workout equipment, you feel good in the moment that you do it because you think it solves something that your head's been spinning in. And then when the equipment comes in, you feel even more guilty. Not only because you spent it, but now you actually have to utilize it, which is why 90% of workout equipment in the home are never used, right? Because it is that. And so I always tell people, if you happen to have an open white area in your top of your chart, be mindful and ask yourself, what is it that I am trying to soothe? What is it that I am trying to solve that somebody's popped into my head? Oh, do I have that problem? I didn't even know I had that problem. Maybe I'll think about that problem. And I see that within my own family, some of them that have that open crown center, that they'll spin out on something that somebody has suggested to them. So I guess my goal for today was to talk about the huge impact that you're making with your clients. And I want people to know about you because you approach this in such a beautiful way. She's also a manifester, guys. So she kind of can do those really bold things. All of my HD nerds that are listening to this, you're going to get that. She's the person who's going to take you down the trail of what you need to be doing and help you to solve your own issues with her guidance, right? And for everyone to kind of understand that we all have different vices and there's nothing wrong with when we make mistakes in our lives, because we learn from our mistakes and we don't beat ourselves up about it anymore. And I totally know that that's what you're about when you're coaching people. So tell everyone again, real quick, how they can find you if they would like to work with you and help them get to their financial goals in a much more fluid way for themselves.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram or TikTok if you want to go connect at Worried to Wealthy, or my website is worriedtowealthy.com. I'm always happy to answer questions and interact on either of those platforms. So if you have a question, please reach out. I am really just here to help people, and I love to help people. Honestly, I find human behavior just so interesting.
Right?
That is
Me
my
too.
thing. And I love to initiate people. The way that I can initiate people is really exciting, which I've recently learned just because I'm a manifester. But the way that I can initiate people into really finding that deep inner, why is this happening? Why can't I break out of this cycle? And then initiate you to actually take the steps to break out of the cycle it's been so powerful. And I really love helping people with this transformation.
I know you do. And I can tell from, the things that we've worked on together, I can just tell that you are passionate about it and people get results when they work with you. So thank you for doing what you do. We need light workers like you and to share existence. And if you are on TikTok and you're not following her, follow her on TikTok. It's my favorite place to follow her at because she really gives good, pertinent information for you. And it kind of soothes your soul sometimes when you're like, oh, should I have done that? And all of a sudden you come on and you say something like, oh, I feel so much better. That's what Larissa just said. So I can follow whatever she says. So it's all good. So thanks again for coming on. And until next time, everyone, follow your alignment. Talk soon. All right, stop.